One of the most desired things that cover the essence and context of the human being is nature. As a gift from millions of years of life evolution, nature shows how little effort the world makes to delight us with its wonders. From the simplest beauty that can be offered to us, to the most painful catastrophes humanity has been able to face, nature has never ceased to be a balancing factor to diminish the irascibility of Homo sapiens. For this reason, pre-Christian beliefs or pagan beliefs emphasize the connection with nature, because it was a world free from the practical advances of today's world, so that they were able to have a stronger spiritual connection with the environment. Same happens with ancient communities as Native Americans, who saw themselves as direct children of nature, since they emphasized that the land did not belong to them, but they belonged to the land, belonged to its own prior will. Under a maternal figure is how this abstract entity has been configured in the paradigms and worldviews of the civilizations that precede us. And perhaps this can respond to generalized perspective and classification for it as a foreign catalyst of human behavior, as an ambassador for the balance of our condition, as a mother for our same and relentless intrigues. But what is the sense of all this naturalist thing? Shall we find truth in nature? Shall we find peace? Is peace the truth of every man, and is every man subject to its own truth? Very few people are able to abandon the comfort of material issues, to submit spiritually to the search for their own identity, embracing life outside of civil society. And while the world was involved in the smoke of the great factories, the race of industrialization, Henry David Thoreau was living in the midst of calm in search of his own meaning, remembering us that each passing age, the human sense becomes more mediocre and less in conscience. Henry David Thoreau was born in 1817, Concord, Boston, Massachusetts. Being kind of a Burgess, he attended Harvard College in 1833, even though he refused to study the traditional careers that every man of his time must study. Thoreau knew that professional life had its catch. He didn't want to live at the mercy of an increasingly simple society, without authenticity or real effort value. Conveniently, he studied sciences and philosophy. Sometime later, Thoreau would meet Ralph Waldo, an American transcendentalist philosopher with whom he would forge a special friendship. Probably the most important friendship throughout Thoreau's life, as he would take inspiration of Waldo's transcendentalism to establish the foundation of his own life philosophy. Having passed this, Waldo's transcendentalist philosophy, which establishes a higher order of importance for the essence of things and not their pragmatic use, helped Thoreau find a clear objective in the midst of the hostility of society, the 9th century, and the rampant advance of modernity. Thoreau's next step was to exile himself to nature, with the help of his friend Waldo, of course. Thoreau abandoned the complexity of the modern world and went to live in a patch of land owned by Waldo, near Lake Walden, in the same Concord where he had grown up and questioned the so-flattered technological advances of society. While there, Thoreau put into practice one of the fundamental pillars of his naturalistic philosophy, self-reliance, meaning social independence, the value of effort, and the good living of what nature offers us without lacking of means. So Thoreau built with his own hands, by the means offered by nature, a cabin of 2 per 4 meters. It wasn't the most luxurious cabin, nor did it have greater attributes, but for Thoreau it was more than enough, since he found a comfortable satisfaction in the simplicity and humility of things. It was the evidence that preached a minimalist lifestyle with a minimum to ensure a comfortable survival without abusing the absurd comfort that the city offers, with its pollution, its noise, and its people. He didn't need anyone else, because he knew that social relationships most of the time work as patches for the gaps in our personality. Life alone was not for Thoreau of greater complexity, as idle man sacrifices his authenticity and trust in finding others like him to complement himself. Thoreau sought to fill such gaps with his own introspective experience, trusting first and foremost on oneself and his own moral judgment. Pure self-reliance. Insist on yourself, never imitate, said Thoreau. He only had himself, the cabin, and the wonders of the ecosystem as permanent companions during his 2-year and 2-month odyssey that allowed him to write some of his most notable works, only possible with a life in the woods. Whatever it should be, 2 years is more than enough time to reflect on the human condition, and so, that time allowed Thoreau to observe society with different eyes, allowed him to explore it on the outside to reach conclusions inside, and to carry out a detailed introspective analysis of himself and the always changing social context. Under this premise, Walden, or Life in the Woods, is born as the conclusion of his experience living in nature and of the pleasures that constitute the idea of being part of it. The product of his work is the compilation of his ideas and thoughts about life near Lake Walden and the imminent decline of technological society, which would later become a benchmark for self-discovery. Thoreau opens Walden by clarifying the reasons why he escapes from civilization and seeks comfort in the forest. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I didn't wish to live what was not life, living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so startling and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shape close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. Truro meticulously recorded every detail from the start of his experiment, from the basic economy of building his cabin, the materials he used, and the full effort time. The cost of a thing is the amount of what I will call life which is required to be exchanged for it immediately or in the long run. He detailed with great accuracy everything he did and was based on, explaining the way in which he collects and plants his seeds, what type of seeds they are, and an exhaustive detail in the process of living. That involvement in details make the narration feel very typical of his time, as it should be, a detailed one appropriate for the uses to which the 9th century is used to offer us. In summary, it's pretty an archaic narrative, perhaps a little difficult to digest for those who are not used to reading or for those who cannot find value in the most simple details. This is paradoxical, since True advocates a world that seeks beauty in the simplicity of things, which makes it ironic that his narrative is somewhat complex. Imagine how our times have changed in just under 200 years that the most complex and beautiful narrative was mostly common, but our times are others and have been replaced by gossip feeders with not even the minimum intellectual status and without much aesthetic composition in the sense of their ideas and writing. In short terms, Thoreau could respond to a certain extent of the current of libertarian thought, being a man who, above all, ensures that the figure of the individual stands out significantly. It's me who must make the final decision. It's me who must remain firm in the daring not to remain silent in the face of injustice. Thoreau likewise proposes a total disconnection of external stimuli, proposes full independence from the state and society, and both Thoreau and the libertarians themselves, both are enemies of taxes and as good capitalists, friends of personal effort. There is an important aspect that Walden highlights, and it is the misunderstanding of nature by human force. We see nature as a consumer product. We believe we have a right to it just as a rancher has a right to its cows or a landowner to its land. This banal understanding of nature is condemned by Thoreau and Walden, in the sense that it has allowed it to resign itself, without any spiritual, aesthetic, or even poetic significance, to such an extent that it is converted into a simple empty landscape, without significant depth. We value its existence, but not its seasons. Walden is a deep journey to nature, to the condition of the human being as a rational animal capable of living in harmony with its environment. It is a testament for lovers of free will and pure naturalism. The philosophy that Thoreau presents to us is undoubtedly a viable option to escape the overwhelming conditions that can arise in the hostile environment that is the city. It teaches us to appreciate the beauty of the simplest details, emphasizing that sometimes more means less too. Perhaps the book and the complementary ideas of Thoreau in it carry on themselves a load of libertarian political stigma. This does not imply a greater problem for each individual to separate itself once from its conditions and go out in search of its own Walden pond, allowing everyone to live free without depending on any moral responsibility that fuels the unbridled pace of modernity. It should be clarified that Thoreau never claims the advantages he finds in living in the woods. Walden is an experiment of his own and collects the conclusion of this based on his personal experience. In the end, the messenger does not matter, only the message, and as such, the right to live in freedom should never be misinterpreted as the right to live in debauchery.
You are delaying me, which is a penal code violation in the state of California.
That law only applies to U.S. citizens.
Well, where are you a citizen of?
I am not a U.S. citizen.
Well, see, that's
I am a free inhabitant. I am of the earth. I do not belong to any corporation. I do not belong to any country.
Yeah, but as long as you're in the sovereign states of the United States, you will abide by the rules and laws.
See,
and you have certain protection.
A free inhabitant is they are allowed to. They're free people. They have all of the rights of a U.S. citizen without following any of their laws.
Well, that would just be pure anarchy if that were the case.
No, because we're peaceful people.